Welcome to Agile Coaches Corner by AgileThought, the podcast for practitioners and leaders seeking advice to refine the way they work and pave the path to better outcomes. Now, here's your host, coach, and Agile expert, Dan Neumann.
Welcome to this episode of Agile Coaches Corner. I'm Dan Neumann, your host, and our goal here is to bring you Agile topics in an approachable way. Just a little reminder, though, that the opinions here will be mine and those of Chris Spagnuolo, who's joining me today, and not necessarily those of AgileThought or other companies or other people. If you have a topic you're interested in hearing us discuss, email it to us at podcast@agilethought.com or tweet it with the hashtag AgileThoughtPodcast. Thanks for joining today, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dan. Good to be back.
Glad to have you back. And today we're going to be looking at some of the challenges around alignment and autonomy. I know it's not unusual to go into an organization and see that things are not aligned from top to bottom.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many clients we walk into that, when we really dig deeply, that the root cause of most of the problems that we see have to do with a lack of alignment. And there are all different ways that it manifests itself, right? There are tons of statistics about it as well of, 70% of projects actually, or strategies don't actually meet their goals because of lack of implementation, right? And lack of implementation is usually because there's a lack of alignment. Nobody knows what they're going for, right? So we have lots of people working on a lot of things, and there's lots of activity going on, but it's not necessarily aligned with the strategy and the things that we're trying to do. So yeah, we see it all over the place for sure.
Yeah, and you touched on the topic of lots of activity. I mean, it's not that people aren't busy doing things, but are they doing the right things?
Yeah, that's the thing. And when they're not working on the right things, it looks like there's a problem with quote unquote executional excellence, right? And that's not always the problem. You can have really, really high performing teams that, their output is just phenomenal, but it's not meeting the market needs, or it's not advancing the strategy of the organization that you're with. So, like we said, ample activity, but not a whole lot of good stuff coming out of the machine. So we have to make sure that machine is aligned to whatever it is that we're trying to deliver.
Yeah, how do you get the sense that it's an alignment issue versus not? One of the things I look at is oftentimes the interruptions or the number of different activities that are demanding somebody's attention, just sheer volume of requests and interruptions.
Yeah, that's definitely one way that we track it, right? So there's a tool, and we can probably do a whole nother podcast on this tool that I built out, but it's a prioritization schema, and it's very visual, right? And we put all the different opportunities that are in flight up there, and we stack rank them into a pyramid, but we color code them by things that are strategic in nature and the opportunities that we should be working on. And then there's some compliance ones of regulatory things that we may have to be working on. But then we have another color coding for emergent work, right? And those are all the distractions that have nothing to do with our strategy, and more often than not, when we build that map out, places that are misaligned, organizations that are misaligned, most of it is like flashing it's flashing at you. We have too much emergent work, right? There's all these little things coming in from all over the organization that people don't have an objective way to say no to, right? So they need a filter to pass all of those opportunities through to be able to get rid of the ones that aren't strategically aligned and only focus on the things that we need to be focused on.
That reminds me of the principle behind the Agile Manifesto, where a lot of people really get tripped up on it, and it's the maximizing the amount of work not done. And that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. And the one, at the technology, but now at the one you're talking about here, which is that emergent work that truly isn't either important to do right now or truly isn't urgent right now, and trying to really focus in on just working on the strategic, the regulatory, and the emergent work that really is appropriate to work on, because work emerges. That's one of the concepts with Agile. We don't know everything up front. Things will emerge. And how do you know which emergent work to address?
Yeah, and that sort of gets into another problem, right? and it's the problem of autonomy in organizations, right? And we want to give all of the really smart people that we hired the autonomy to do the right things, right? But alignment and autonomy have to go hand in hand. And what you're describing, right, is this sort of chaotic culture, right? It's a lot of autonomy, no alignment, right? So in that case, when we have that going on, it's exactly what we talked about. Tons of activity, but the energy is diffused all over and it's not actually achieving any goal, right? Because there's no alignment at all. So those two things go hand in hand. And aligned autonomy is a big topic that I'm super interested in. And I think when you look at how those two things join together, it solves some of the problems that you're talking about.
One of the anti-patterns or misperceptions of agility is that it's not very disciplined, or that it's chaotic and it's you make stuff up as you go along. And the concept of aligned, it's always a misnomer. And second, this concept of aligned autonomy really helps bring focus to that. It is very disciplined. It should be. Scrum's disciplined. Kanban has lots of discipline in it, from visualizing the work and having explicit policies and limiting work in process. And then you can use that discipline to make sure you're delivering with in alignment with the corporate vision, the corporate strategy, and allow really smart people to have some autonomy in how they contribute to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always believed that about Agile. When I very first started doing it, the organization I was with at the time thought we were a bunch of hippie kids, and this was all about everybody gets to do whatever they want and nobody has titles and all that kind of stuff. And what we were finding as we were going through was that we were becoming exactly what you just said, more and more structured about how we were doing our work, right? And there were a lot of rules on how we did things, and we were building filters to make sure that only the right work was getting into the machine, so to speak, right? So I've always kind of viewed it that way, that Scrum or Agile, it was just the braces to kind of give you that level of discipline to do the right things, right? And as I saw teams mature and we moved into Kanban, like we took the braces off of, Scrum with all the prescribed practices, but the discipline sort of remained. And I think that's a key word there, right? Is the discipline to do the right thing and stay aligned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a conversation today, and the subject of like a daily stand-up, a daily scrum, a daily whatever, walk the board came up, and they said, well, we have this thing at the end of the day, and we call it the dinner table conversation. I'm like, fantastic. Like, I'm not going to make you call it something else. Like, you've got this thing that works for you. You do about 3 or 4 days a week, depending on workload and other things, and it's looking for patterns in the data that they see, the data of their behavior, the data of the systems, where are issues coming from. And I love that they have a name for it. It's the dinner table conversation. It's their name. They don't need to go take somebody else's name. Maybe if they were doing Scrum, I'd make them take another name, but they're not doing Scrum, so it's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So alignment helps the teams know how to contribute towards that alignment with autonomy. And then the visual that comes to mind then is the consultant 2x2 matrix. So how do people start looking for failure patterns or success patterns within, whether they've got alignment or autonomy?
Yeah. So where's the sweet spot, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we already talked about one, anti-pattern, right? And that's the whole low alignment, high autonomy, right? And that's kind of the, I love the shiny objects. I'm running all over and doing whatever. So that's a definite failure pattern, right? So we want to avoid that. The other quadrants would be, if you have low autonomy and low alignment, right, then we have a serious problem. And usually what we're seeing there is a compliant culture, right? People are just doing what they're asked. There's a lot of not my job syndrome and a real lack of, discretionary effort, which is a real fancy way of saying creativity, right? People just aren't creative in an environment like that. They'll follow whatever anybody tells them to do. That's what they're going to do, right? They just don't have any direction.
I see like pointy-haired boss kind of thing. They're just going in and telling people to do stuff
that is totally what it is. It's the clueless leader leading the whole rest of the organization off the cliff, right? so that's kind of how that one feels. The other failure pattern is when you have really high alignment, but no autonomy, right? That's a really tough place to be as well. So that, again, really compliant culture, super aligned because somebody's telling me what to do, but I have no autonomy. And again, that really stifles all of your creativity. So you have two different things at play there, right? The first one was really about survival mode. The second one is about lack of creativity and compliant cultures. So those are your failure modes there. The other one we already talked about was that diffuse energy, but the upper right quadrant, if you're kind of thinking of the two axes there, you've got high autonomy and high alignment, right? And that's where we want to be, super aligned, but very autonomous, right? In that state, we really start to see organizations that have people committed to the organizational culture, right? There's a lot of goal clarity in organizations like that. People are super engaged, and it really maximizes two things, right? It maximizes the creative potential of the people who are in your organization. And because they're very well aligned, that creativity allows them to consistently achieve goals, right? Because now they're working with clarity, they're working with purpose, they're working with energy, they're motivated, right? And organizations like that, we see a lot of freedom to have this ability to have autonomous decision-making happening, right? Because people are aligned with the overall objectives. We trust the people in our organization now to make the right decisions because we know they're aligned. We know they're going to make the right decision based on that alignment.
The thought that came as we went through that, so you'd talked about survival mode and some high alignment but low autonomy. For me, that kind of a thought of a traditional military. Of course, General McChrystal's book, Team of Teams, he talks about, I think, shifting away from that high alignment, very low autonomy towards something different with his team of teams. And I don't know if you see that similarly, or because military came to mind for that quadrant, right or wrong.
Yeah, military very much comes to mind. That is the command and control quadrant for sure. And McChrystal's book I think he's spot on. I think he really nails it when he talks about that, right? That high alignment's really necessary, but giving the people the right information to make autonomous decisions when you're in the heat of the action, that's really essential, right? That gives us, the real agility in a business to have everybody making decisions in real time without having to go up the ladder, get approvals, come back down, give it to your team, tell them it's okay to do it. If everybody's given that autonomy to make the right decisions because we know that organizationally we're all aligned and everybody not just reads the mission statement on the wall, but internalizes what the mission is and what the vision is and what the results are that we're aiming for. If that's internalized and people can, live that instead of just read it, that's the difference.
Have a topic you want us to tackle? Send an email to podcast@agilethought.com or tweet it with the hashtag AgileThoughtPodcast.
The other thought that came to mind, and we use it in some of the training that we do, is the Cynefin model. So a sense-making framework where it breaks issues down into 4 different parts, although David Snowden says it's not a 2x2 consultant matrix. That's okay. We'll let him have that one. It starts with the simple problems. And then, so those are ones where there's a very obvious cause and effect. And then there are complicated ones where I think of my car. You have to go find an expert. I just know it's making a weird noise. The expert shows, oh, that noise is this thing, and they fix it. And then it gets into the complex domain where you can know cause and effect, but only by looking backwards. And that's typically where agility fits in really well. And then chaos is where you want to stay out of. And I was relating that then as you were talking about high autonomy and high alignment. It feels like there are some areas where the military structure, the high alignment, low autonomy makes sense. So my example is always McDonald's for simple and that type of, I do not want the person making my burger getting creative with it. I don't want autonomy at McDonald's. So less creativity. Just make the burger. I want the same, mediocre burger that I get every time, and it's fine. And so I think of that even with technology teams or other businesses, though there are certain areas where you really want high high alignment and low. You want highly reproducible behaviors. And I don't know if you, and then hopefully maybe we're automating them so humans aren't doing them and feeling bad about it. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, see, I guess I'm a creative soul at heart. So when I hear things like that, it really disheartens me. But no, I agree. It depends on what the expectation is of what you're producing, right? McDonald's entire business model is built on the ability to replicate, down to the most nitpicky detail. Every single restaurant is exactly the same. Same with Starbucks. Their baristers are trained to produce the coffee like a machine, and when we make people machines and take creativity away from them, I feel, in a broader sense as a society, I think we lose something there, right? So when I think about most of the organizations that we work build software, right? And I think that's a creative endeavor, right? There's a great book called Artful Making that talks a lot about the mindsets of artists and the mindsets of software engineers and how similar they are, right? So they're very creative people. So when I'm working in the technology field and dealing with customers who are building technology and building software, I try to really look at it as a creative endeavor, and how do we create that strategic alignment without taking creativity away from the people whose hands are on the keyboards?
Yeah, and I use the McDonald's example. I still think there's probably more autonomy there in some facets. I just don't want it with my burger. So how you treat your customers, the whole franchise model is designed to be highly reproducible with low variance. But then you look at like Southwest Airlines, and they're in a regulated airline industry, but they still have this feeling of fun, and the flight attendants get autonomy within a boundary of sorts.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm a fan of, right? Is you can play in the sandbox all day long. We're just going to tell you what the sandbox is, right? And within that sandbox, you can build whatever you feel like building in there. So that's where, some of the work that I've been doing lately with OKRs is really focusing around building the boundaries of the sandbox to say, okay, here's where we're playing, right? We're a technology company. Today, we're not building refrigerators. We're building software that supports, a business application. So it gives us a little bit of focus of where we're going, but it doesn't take away your creativity within that focused area.
Yeah. And so OKRs, to spell out the 3-letter acronym, objectives and key results, the framework you're alluding to there. And maybe a little kind of OKRs 101. What's the Cliff Notes? Just in case there may be people for which this is new.
Sure, the Cliff Notes.
We can tag team on it.
Yeah, no problem. So OKRs are objectives and key results, and they've been around in one way or another for a little while. A guy named John Doerr started playing around with them when he was at Intel, brought them over to Google. Google now uses them. Netflix uses it. I don't know, just about anybody you can think of, really. I know Spotify's been using it, and Geese and Slack and NerdWallet and tons of other organizations. But an OKR, simply stated, is what you said. It's an objective, a stated objective, and then 2 or 3 key results, the metrics that are going to measure how we're moving towards achieving that objective, right? So the objective is very, I wouldn't say flowery language, right? But it's very qualitative, right? It's inspirational. It's motivating. It's sort of independently actionable thing that we can have our organization decide this is our objective, right? And we make them time bound. We generally do them on a quarterly basis and say, for the next quarter, here's our objective, right? So it's sort of like an organizational mission statement, with a, time box around it, right? For lack of a better word. The key results part of it, those are the measurable results. Those are quantitative. They let us know how we're doing in terms of getting towards there, right? And we check in on those things on a weekly basis. Are we moving the needle, or are we not, right? So an objective can be something as simple as, hey, in the next quarter, we want to launch an awesome MVP. Or it can be, very specific to your business. I was working with a company that does insurance adjusting, right? And they wanted to transform the compliance patterns of the adjusters, right? So that was their objective, right? Key results are a little more numbers oriented, right? And there should always be a number in your key results. It's what needle are we moving and where are we trying to move it to, right? So it could be as simple, again, as like increase sales by 27%, or in the case of our insurance folks, right, it could be increase adjuster compliance by 60% over the next quarter. So simply, that's the high level of what an objective and a key result would look like.
Mm-hmm. One of the tips on the key results that I'd heard is trying to take the number as opposed to just an increase to say we want to move the metric from X to Y as a way of keeping track of that. And I don't know, I don't lose any sleep over that distinction, but I thought it was an interesting way to make sure that is a very specific number so that we know how, let's say, a percentage would be calculated. We're really talking about that raw number.
Yeah, for sure. And whenever I'm coaching organizations, if we do have key results like the ones I just mentioned, we'll always baseline it to where are we starting from, where are we trying to get to, so we know just how hard that is. So the question is probably hanging around of like, okay, great. So you built an objective and key results. How does this help us with any of what we were just talking about, the whole aligned autonomy thing? So the way it kind of, we'll go through each piece. So the way it helps with alignment, right, is that we cascade OKRs through the organization. And every level that we cascade down through gets to build their own set of objectives and key results that have to align directly to the one above them, right? So if there's a top level OKR, a second tier would look to that OKR and say, okay, what are we going to take out of that my team or my team of teams can accomplish, right? What are our objectives and what are our key results going to be? And then they are free to execute against that OKR however they want to, right? So that gives us alignment to the top level OKR. And it also lets us say, we're going to decide how we're going to move forward on this thing, right? So there's an example that is probably completely overused at this point, but everybody uses the football example. And the whole football example of cascading OKRs goes like this. The top level is, you've got the general manager of the organization, and his whole goal is to make money for the owners, right? And he's going to look at it and say, well, the way I'm going to make money is, I'm going to win the Super Bowl. So win one Super Bowl is, a key result for him. But another key result may be about increasing attendance at the stadium on Sundays, right? And maybe they're a lousy team and they need to increase their attendance to 88% from 80% or something like that. They don't fill the stadium in general, but an 8% increase would be great for them, right? When we would cascade that to the next level, you have all different parts of the football organization, right? You've got the head coach of the actual football team who looks at it and goes, well, I can't do much about filling the stadium. Well, sort of, right? But I can do something about trying to win the Super Bowl, right? So his objective for his organization, the team, is to have a winning season, right? He's going to put together key results based on metrics that he knows are going to deliver, hopefully, what a winning season might be, right? And it may be something about how many yards they need passing per game, or how many, yards on average they need for punt returns to have a winning season. So they're going to put together something like that, right? There may be something around a defensive metric. But there's a lot of other pieces of a football organization besides the team, right? Take public relations. They would look at that objective and set of key results and say, well, I can't do anything to help you win a Super Bowl, but I can definitely help you fill that stadium, right? So they'll take that and they'll create a public relations oriented objective and a set of key results that their team can execute on, right? So it may be something about media coverage or presence in social media, or how many times they're getting their players, featured on local news stations or something like that, right? So each one of those can kind of look at the top level objective and key results, define their own strategy for their own set of teams, and build metrics on how they would move forward. And then you would naturally cascade further and further down, right? Within the football team, we have an offensive line, a defensive line, special teams. Each one of those would look at the head coach's objectives and key results and build their own that align with that, right? So you can kind of see where this goes. It would cascade all the way down, and a lot of organizations will cascade all the way down to individuals. And the whole purpose is to be able to point up through that stack and see how your individual contribution or your team's contribution is directly aligned with the top level goal of the organization. So that gives us tons of autonomy, and it's also letting us decide how we're going to execute and what strategy we're going to build to help meet that top level goal. So is that a good enough 101?
That's beautiful, and I didn't realize the football thing had been overdone, but maybe not yet.
It's getting there.
Getting there? Okay, well, we'll maybe come up with another one for next time. What you mentioned, though, does bring to mind one of the challenges I think I have with OKRs and an organization where once a target is put out there, you're expected to hit that target, and failure too is bad. Like, only one team wins the Super Bowl, so like, don't bet your life on it, in the football. But working toward that goal and falling short of it still can result in an outcome you want. I guess can result in an outcome you want. So we're going for the Super Bowl. We only make it to the NFC Championship game and we lose, let's say, but it's still better than if we hadn't had those things in place, I suppose. But I struggle. And with organizations where safety is an issue, I wonder if there's some ways to help foster that mentality within an OKR.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point you bring up. And when I'm coaching and consulting, I never talk about OKRs as solid goals, right? It's not that you have to achieve this, otherwise you failed. And while OKRs are a goal-setting system technically, I kind of look at them as a very educational system, right? And I think it's because of, working in Lean and working in Agile for so long that we're always retrospecting, that I kind of look at OKRs as, hey, on a weekly basis, you have a chance to figure out if what you're doing is moving you in the right direction. And on a quarterly basis, you have a chance to reevaluate, was our strategy right? Were these OKRs the right ones? And it lets us adapt much more quickly than having big, 2-year or 5-year plans that, by the time we get that far down the line, we've screwed our business completely, right? Like, I like the adaptability of it, right? And what I usually coach teams towards is kind of what you just said, right? Like, set a really hard goal. You don't want to set easy goals. If you set an easy goal, you're going to sandbag it and meet it every time, right? And it doesn't really push your company to do anything special or different. So set your goals difficult, make them difficult, make them, a 50-50 chance that you're even going to hit that thing. And then if we get to, at the end of the quarter, we do a review and you hit, 60, 70% of that goal, that's probably much better than you were doing before you did OKRs, right? And to your point, you're getting something that was moving you in the right direction. And what we'll learn when we do that review is, okay, what could we have done differently to get from 60 to 70% to 100, right? So it gives us a focus on learning about ourselves and learning about our strategies and how can we do better each time. It's not always about hitting the goal or not hitting the goal. And, in my experience, if you have an objective and you have 3 key results sitting under it, if you hit 2 out of 3, you did great. Like that is a really good thing. And it lets you look at that 3rd key result and have some learnings around that, or decide maybe that just wasn't the right tactic, right? Or maybe the objective was slightly off. And on a quarterly basis, we can adjust those things and get better and better at doing these.
It's that whole, it's a journey, it's about the journey, not the destination. That kind of comes to mind with OKRs.
It's
a journey. Yeah. It's a journey towards that objective and the key result. Well, cool. We are coming up on our time box. I know for me, time flew today. Hopefully for folks listening, it did as well. Is there any last thing about OKR that you'll be disappointed if we didn't touch on before we end?
Oh, we can talk about it for
come back for part 2.
Maybe we should, because there are there are interesting ideas on how to implement it, right? There are definitely failure patterns to people who abuse or misuse OKR. So maybe we can do that. Have another session and talk a little bit about that.
I like that. I like the failure patterns, and I don't know, just human evolution. I think we learn from things that don't go well. It's like, it hurts when I do that. Maybe I should not do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you? Give you a chance. Are you reading anything interesting these days, or what's inspiring you? I think last time it was a little bit about music.
So currently I'm reading How Music Works from David Byrne, and it's a really interesting take on the music industry in general. And he each chapter looks at how music is made from different perspectives and the different influences different components have on it. Some of it is about where music is made, right? So what the physical environment does to affect music. There's a whole thing on how technology has affected music production. But a really interesting chapter is on collaboration. And I think a lot of people can really get a lot out of that. So it's really interesting seeing how different musicians collaborate with each other. And there's this interesting thing that I was reading about, and it's looking at written scores in a graphic way instead of a written score of notes on a page that you have to play exactly. And it has a lot to do with what we're talking about now, this aligned autonomy thing. And it doesn't seem as crazy as it seems. The scores don't specify which notes to play. They just suggest higher or lower pitches as the lines wander up and down on this visual score. And they visually express how the players are supposed to relate to one another. So there's this alignment about where the conductor wants this music piece to go, but the musicians have the autonomy to sort of figure out how it's going to be expressed. So it's really interesting and how that relates to the conversation we were just having. So super cool book if you have a chance to check it out. That's
very cool. I might, I think, use my new Audible credit and maybe see about picking that one up. Something to listen to on the airplanes. Outstanding.
There you go.
Very cool. Look forward to it. Hey, thanks for joining today, Chris. And I guess we have a part 2 to get out sometime soon.
All right. Sounds great.
All right.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
This has been the Agile Coaches Corner podcast, brought to you by AgileThought. Get the show notes and other helpful tips from this episode and other episodes at agilethought.com/podcast.